Time for the Daly Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about the movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Kryptonian Collection, the monthly show where our venerated Council of El will gather to discuss, argue, and finally vote on whether a movie should be granted entrance into the illustrious Kryptonian Collection, a list of the greatest films our meager little planet has to offer. My name is Scott Daly, your host and a permanent member of the Council, and joining me as always is my co-host and fellow permanent Council member, Matt Freeman. Matt, how are you doing?
Doing great, Scott, and I'm excited about yet another installment of our Kryptonian Collection series. We're getting quite a number of Kryptonian collections, aren't we?
We are. This is number 8, and we have 7 movies in the collection. So we've only had 1 failure so far. Let's see if we have 2. but first, we need to bring in our rotating council seat member. Joining us this month for that seat is Paul Acevedo. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thanks a lot, Scott. I'm a vampire.
see the inside joke.
I just had to vamp.
The inside joke is my script tells Paul to vamp for a second. So that's what just happened there.
Yes, and also we joked earlier about the pointlessness of mentioning that you're supposed to be vamping, and
if you tell people that you're supposed to vamp, it ruins the whole point of vamping. But that's fine. The reason Paul is here is because his film last month, Audition, the Japanese horror film, was successfully entered into the collection. So he joins us, and he gets a vote this time around. So he's super important. I think this month we've got another really great movie that I think is going to lead to some really good conversation. But before we introduce our special guest and his movie, we need to go over the rules. And that is what I make Matt do. So Matt, why don't you take it away?
Each month, the challenger will put forth his movie and argument for including it. The council and our challenger will then discuss the film in detail, including its merits and flaws. Once this discussion is complete, a vote will be taken. Each of the 3 members of the council gets 1 vote. And if the film receives at least 2 yes votes, it is entered into the collection. At this point, the challenger would also be awarded the 3rd seat on the council, kicking off Paul and taking his place. The challenger would then join us next month and get a deciding vote in that month's film. If, however, the film does not get the required 2 votes, it is rejected and forever banned from consideration. The challenger, of course, is welcome to come back in a few months' time and put forth a different film for consideration. And speaking of that challenger, who appears before the council this month?
We have Keven Kuhlman. Keven, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. I'm excited about this opportunity.
And before we go on, Matt, I just have to applaud you on that wonderful reading of the rules. Only you can make rules sound exciting, Matt, so good job.
Well, this is an absolutely thrilling and riveting process, so I have no trouble summoning up the enthusiasm necessary for that.
All right, Keven, tell us a little about yourself before we go into the movie.
Well, I'm a Taurus, and I'm 25 years old, and I like long walks on the beach, and I'm a writer at LewtonBus.net, which is the site that previous council member Shannon Hubble was on. I write for him, so I'm excited about getting to spread my wings and venture out into podcasts for the first time.
Yeah. I'm glad to have you on here. You have the chance to be a better guest than Shannon, so I'm going to pit you guys against each other. All right, so Keven, what movie have you brought before the council today?
I have brought Martin Scorsese's 1973 masterpiece, Mean Streets.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the movie, just give it a brief summary, and then tell us why you think it's worthy.
So Mean Streets is basically the story of Charlie, played by Harvey Keitel, who is a small-time mob collector who struggles with his position, dealing with his Catholic guilt that he feels, his lust, and all of his sinful desires, as well as his friendships with some of the other low-level hoodlums that he associates with, as well as his relationships. It's basically just a story of him trying to deal with all of these chaotic elements in his life while he tries to keep the straight and narrow, both from a theological standpoint as well as from his career standpoint. So I love this film. I love Martin Scorsese. He's my favorite filmmaker. So seeing this film is just a microcosm of everything that he does so well. Scorsese is obviously, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me here, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And arguably the greatest filmmaker of all time. In fact, if you Google search greatest directors of all time, Martin Scorsese is the first name that comes up. That's a fact. You can look that up right now. So just seeing basically 6 decades of his work just kind of filtered through this film itself, I think it's just a perfect encapsulation of everything that he does and all the themes that he likes to touch, and everything that he can put onto the screen through his cinematography, through his cinematic language, through his acting performances that he can get out, through his writing. It's just everything that is Martin Scorsese is Mean Streets.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Before we get into our just general discussion, though, I wanted to just go around our council table and get each of you guys' thoughts on the film. Tell us if you had seen the movie before or not, and what you generally thought about it. And Paul, since you're our rotating one, why don't you go first?
Hey, well, let me stop rotating for a moment. Actually, I had not seen the movie before. I didn't know if I was going to like it because I'm not especially into crime dramas, that kind of genre. But I really should have known better. I should have just taken it on Martin Scorsese's reputation. But yes, I was highly impressed by it. I thought it ended a little too abruptly, and the beginning was kind of confusing, but everything in the middle I just totally loved.
Awesome. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, so it's funny. Everything Kevin was saying, I was kind of having my own mental, almost not quite rebuttal to it, but it's funny because I'm someone who sometimes finds some of Scorsese's tendencies to be irritating, particular ones, and this film has a lot of his sort of the same things that he does in every movie, except this is one of his very early movies, so he's a bit less disciplined about how he does it. I'm sure we'll get into what exactly I mean by that, but like one example would be all of his movies are very long and have very a lot of characterization, just like scenes where very little is happening to advance the plot, but it's very heavy on the characterization and the contextualization of relationships. And this movie had a ton of that. And I'm not necessarily saying that was bad. Obviously, I love characterization when done correctly. It was just that that was the one example of how a lot of Scorsese's tendencies were kind of overflowing in this movie. And it'll be an interesting discussion because I'm probably the most on the fence person on the council at the moment, but I'll let you go ahead, Scott, and we can get into details later.
Yeah, so I'm kind of with Kevin here in that I think Scorsese is one of the best filmmakers ever. I am still thinking about Silence, and it's been like a month since I've seen it. That film is amazing. When I first heard, I had not seen this movie before. This was one of my big holes in my Scorsese knowledge. And I wasn't sure because I was like, wow, you're going to pick this as your Scorsese movie? Because in my head, 6 different films jump up when I think what an example of Scorsese would be. But I was pretty pleasantly surprised. I do kind of agree with Matt that you can tell this is his early film. You can tell that he's a little rough around the edges. He hasn't quite figured everything out yet. I think he actually edited this film too, which I don't think he does with much of his other movies. And I can kind of tell that he's not like a master editor. But it's also kind of a movie that seems like tailored toward me. I'm half Sicilian. I was raised Roman Catholic. So like the Catholic guilt portion of this film, like applied directly to my childhood almost. So like I can kind of understand that from a really intimate place. I also like all my uncles. I have 4 uncles on my mom's side of the family, and they're all like exactly like every single one of these Italian guys in Scorsese's films. So that like felt like you're watching part of your family. So I mean that's true in all the Scorsese movies, and that's why I love Goodfellas as well. But I really did enjoy it here as well. So I don't think it's a perfect movie, but I did like it a lot. But let's jump into the specifics. And Kevin, I'll let you start off on. If you just want to start a conversation about, some of the parts that you particularly liked, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
So mentioning what Paul said about the ending being abrupt, I want to jump right in there and talk about the ending.
Start with the ending. That works.
How perfect it is in my book. So really that ending is everything that this movie builds up to. So for those who haven't seen it or need a refresher, because of course you would watch or listen to a podcast about a movie you haven't seen, the movie ends with Michael, who has been screwed over by Johnny Boy, having an accomplice played by Scorsese shoot up the car that Johnny Boy, Charlie, and Teresa are in. And it ends on a note where Johnny Boy walks away, and Charlie is bleeding on his knees while a fount of water is spewing behind him. And it's such a perfect moment because all the motifs from earlier in the film are being brought back. The fire, instead of fire being his penance that he suffers through throughout the film. In the very beginning, he puts his hand in the candle. He puts his hand in the fire at the restaurant. When he's at the bar, he lights a match and puts his finger up to it. Instead of that being his penance, he's finally being absolved of his sins by ending this drama with Johnny Boy and having this fount of water being sprayed behind him. It's just, I find that to be such a remarkable image for what Scorsese's trying to do with this film.
That's interesting. So this is maybe a slight tangent to what you were saying, but my interpretation of how he was always holding his finger to fires was that he was kind of obsessed with the idea of hell and was almost like reminding himself of like the torment implicit in in going to hell and kind of because he, as you said earlier, he's constantly struggling to be his version of a good Catholic, which is fairly divergent from actual doctrine, I think, because he kind of makes himself the arbiter of whether he's doing a good job or not. But he also has this morbid fear of hell, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I agree with the fire as penance thing, and I think that's, even like we see it in the opening shot of the film when he's in the actual church, and then he goes down into the bar, which is filmed in this amazing red hue, which is like him literally going into hell. Like it transitions from him being in the church to this bar with this really creepy red hue, and then he dances with that stripper, and the first thing he does after that is like burn his finger on the fire. So, I mean, that is a sign of penance. Like he almost immediately has to do it. And it's very much like Charlie's version of sin is always kind of relationship focused. Like he almost doesn't care about all the mafia stuff he's doing. He doesn't care about the crimes that he's committing. It's all like he feels guilty about being attracted to the black woman. He feels guilty about being with Teresa. He feels guilty about his relationship with Johnny Boy. Like, it's all very much focused on one particular part of sin and not the full gamut of all the sins he's actually committing. So I think it does. I think going back to your topic, Kevin, which is the ending. I think it does tie in very nicely. I loved how that shot was composited. Like it was very fitting and beautiful. Like him on his knees, almost in prayer, with like covered in blood, with that water behind him was excellent.
Mm-hmm. And he's been shot in his penance hand, right?
Yeah. Like literally,
Ouch.
a Jesus wound.
Yeah. And that's like the hand that he uses to burn himself, and that's where he was shot.
Yeah. And there's also a part, I don't know if you guys caught it. It cuts back to the black stripper in the middle of that. She's just sitting at a table, like eating, like in between. Yeah. That whole scene, and that's like almost like there's a 3-beat with her throughout the movie. There's her at the beginning, there's when he actually sets the date with her and then bails on it, and then there's her at the end. What was your interpretation of her character? Because I was trying to think of how I felt about that, especially when they made sure to show her in the end, and I couldn't come to a conclusion that made satisfactory sense to me. Does anyone have a swing at that?
I mean, I think that's part of what makes this movie a little bit shaggy, is that it doesn't 100% tie up perfectly. Not every thread is perfectly woven. But I think it's definitely a aspect of Charlie not being able to be himself, not truly being able to accept that he might be attracted to a black woman. I mean, he talks about it. He says, she's beautiful, she's gorgeous, but she's black, so I don't want to be seen in public with her. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those moments where he is struggling not only with his Catholic faith and his career, but also in finding who he is as a person. Yeah, and she's representative of that thread.
Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of the things to me that this was one of the many things that made him a very unlikable character, as most Scorsese protagonists are. And obviously, there's a purpose to making your protagonist unlikable. But I found this protagonist to be particularly unlikable for some reason. I guess I could kind of investigate why that might be, but I found that I didn't really think he had any admirable qualities, and perhaps the qualities that Scorsese was trying to say were admirable, I also didn't find admirable. So that was another thing.
that actually surprises me. Yeah, I mean, like I agree with you in general that most of Scorsese's protagonists are scumbags, but I actually thought this was one of the more sympathetic ones. Like I kind of understand. Like he's torn between, like he's such a nice guy that he really doesn't even have the heart for mob work. Like I don't think he ever would have been successful in it.
Agreed.
But
no, I mean, and that's pretty clearly why his uncle is trying to put him in charge of the restaurant.
Yeah.
Is because he's not cut out for being a collector.
Right.
Yeah. Right. One of my favorite scenes of this movie actually was, like when all the other mob guys come over to the restaurant and they're so just dismissive of him, and like he's just sort of awkwardly standing off to the side, watching them, and no one's making any overture toward him, but like he so desperately kind of like you can tell just by the framing of the scene. There's no like verbal cues indicating this, but you could just tell that he's just like burning to be like sitting at that table with them. That I thought that was extremely well communicated.
Yeah, and he doesn't he doesn't know how to do any of those things because he doesn't know how. Like he's the type of person that wants everyone to like him, and I think actually Johnny Boy says that in the film specifically. Is like everyone likes you, and he sets out to do that specifically. He wants to be everyone's friend. He wants everyone to like him. He can't ever let someone down, and I think that goes back to his idea of sin and his constant like stress it. Like he he needs to be absolved. I mean, that's the first quote of the film, right? Like, he needs to be absolved on the streets. Like, he can't just go to church and be absolved of his sins. Like, he has to make things up to people. And I think he sees Johnny Boy as kind of his penance. Like, this, if I help this guy, I can make up for the bad things I've done.
Yeah, well, then there's the Catholic doctrine of good works, where you actually do have to do things to obtain that forgiveness.
Yeah, but he's also extremely dismissive of the 10 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers and everything else. So he definitely is way too focused on the good works end of it and not on anything that he actually is being taught by the church. It's a very specific, specifically selfish version of Catholic doctrine that he's got in his mind.
And it's kind of a very Scorsese version of Catholic doctrine too, because I mean, you watch Silence, that movie's, like, in my opinion, a scathing indictment of Catholic dogma and Jesuit dogma. So it kind of, like, I see that parallel in these two movies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, to speak to me not finding him sympathetic, even though he does have, like, really obvious loyalty. It's loyalty in a very controlling way, and that's another Scorsese thing. Like, where usually what you see, I'm just sort of like polling my memory randomly, but usually what you'll see in other Scorsese films is a protagonist who, like, fixates on some woman and is sort of insanely loyal toward the woman, but also insanely controlling of the woman. And this is a movie where there was some of that, but also a lot of that kind of controlling, just pressure and violence even toward Johnny Boy. It made you kind of not, I don't know, it made me personally not see the loyalty as being a positive thing.
I mean, are you saying that he shouldn't have been looking out for Johnny Boy? Did Johnny Boy not need that?
I mean, Johnny Boy's, he needs all the help he can get. I don't think necessarily.
Yeah, shame on him for trying to keep him from destroying himself.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't save him, though. is one counter argument to that.
Oh, that's true.
He's almost enabling him, kind of, right? Like, to let him, like, continue this path of destruction and, like, save his ass every time he gets into inescapable problems.
Because Michael would have just broken his legs. Yeah. But now he's dead because Charlie had to, like, try and mend fences rather than just letting the thing play out. I don't know. I think you could that's very interesting, because you could discuss that and you could come to completely, there's no reason that you have to agree on what the film is saying about that. Is the film saying that Charlie should have left him alone, or is the film saying that he did have this debt to Johnny Boy? I think that there's a good argument either way, actually. To
me, it's the tragedy of the character that he can't leave him alone. That, like, he is not able to do that. He's not able to separate himself from him through Catholic guilt or whatever. He just can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can I, on Matt's point about Charlie being controlling and Johnny Boy needing all the help he can get, can I just point out one of my favorite parts about this movie? And it's that every one of these characters is an idiot.
Yes.
So we've kind of talked about Charlie and Johnny Boy, but Michael, who's one of the other protagonists of the film, who's a loan shark trying to collect from Johnny Boy. The first scene he's introduced doing, he bought the wrong lenses that are Japanese instead of German and are adapters instead of actual lenses. Like, he's completely introduced as a buffoon from the first scene he's in.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And sorry to interrupt, but I just want to talk about the introductions for these four characters themselves are like I want to use this as an example of simple, effective filmmaking, because four of them has like a minute-long scene maybe, and it, like, perfectly defines their character. Like, Tony, like, you see him go into the bathroom in the bar, and he flips out on the guy shooting heroin, kicks him out, then kicks out the drug dealer. It's like, bam, you got this. He owns the bar. He cares about the bar. It's important to him. Michael, like, you see him in the business exchange. He's stupid. He's a businessman, but he's stupid and doesn't really know what he's doing. Johnny Boy blows up a mailbox, and Charlie is in church, and that's like bam, like just your four characters, you have an understanding of them like immediately, right away, just from these short little scenes with not even too much dialogue in it, and it's just really effective filmmaking.
Yeah,
so you can go on.
Completely agree with that.
Sorry.
So Michael's an idiot. Tony is also an idiot. He lets Johnny have 2 tabs. He buys tigers for no reason.
That tiger scene, I was like, what's going on in this movie?
That's one of those scenes that should have been edited out,
yeah.
But I love the fact that it wasn't.
It's fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun. It's hilarious watching all of them jump onto the tops of couches and freak out while Tony is like cuddling with one of the tigers in its cage. It's wonderful how completely pointless that scene kind of is in terms of plot or even character development. There's not a whole lot there other than a little bit of, explaining Tony's character, but it's just kind of an unnecessary scene. But I don't know. I love that scene.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't dislike the scene. I thought it was funny, but like, if I look at it's shockingly only a 2-hour long movie. You think Scorsese, you think 3 hours every time, but if I'm making edits, that's one of the first things I cut. It doesn't.
Oh, definitely.
It doesn't. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of the being idiots, how many scenes were of just like, I think what was intentionally childish looking, like brawling, where men are just beating the crap out of each other, but doing it so poorly that no one actually gets hurt.
Yeah, the whole pool hall scene. Yeah,
the whole the 78-minute long pool hall scene where they just destroy everything in the whole pool hall, but no one is injured. I mean, maybe someone is slightly injured, and then they just like happily shake hands afterward, and it doesn't. I mean, it ends in a complicated way, but they're just fine after the fight.
Well, the thing
Italian.
Yeah. The thing I love about that scene is he calls what is the word mook, I think it is. Which no one actually knows what that word means. No one in the scene knows what the word means. But they just start fighting over it. They come, pay off the cops, and then immediately start fighting again. It's like it's filmed like it's Scorsese handheld ridiculousness, but there's no choreography in this. It's literally just run into each other. And I think you're right. Johnny Boy is the only one that's like visibly injured from the fight, and he's got like just a black eye.
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure. I mean, I guess now reflecting on it, I'm not even sure if that was so ridiculous because there wasn't choreography and they were just like, okay, go crazy, guys, go crazy, or if it was so ridiculous because they intentionally wanted it to seem that way. Because like you have like a time when there's like 3 guys who are like holding down Charlie, and then somehow he's not injured at all. So like that says that they weren't trying to injure him.
I think it was intentional. I think it's like you're fighting like you don't want to rip anyone's shirt or something. Is kind of how they're fighting.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at it, so Johnny Boy breaks a pool cue and then doesn't do anything with it.
Right.
And he jumps onto a pool table and then just starts karate kicking at the air.
But yeah,
it
he's
definitely
not really
feels like anyone. Something where they're not really trying to hurt each other. They're just fighting for no reason. Can I talk about one shot in that I just loved, which was the oneer where it just follows the 2 guys just trying to grab the Charlie's associate, who I don't think we ever find out his name, or if they did, it's one of the names they just kind of say without actually like emphasizing. Yeah. And he just follows it in almost a giant circle around the pool hall. And they're just grabbing at him. He's throwing chairs on the ground. It's basically just him running away from them. It doesn't really do anything. Like they don't actually like throw any punches really. It just follows them through the pool hall. And it's like a 15-second scene, maybe a little bit longer, but it's just so perfectly follows all the action that's happening. You always can see kind of what's going on, but it keeps that chaotic nature of that pool fight. It almost echoes to me the one in Goodfellas through the Copacabana. Only clearly it's a significantly more raw version of that shot.
And that I mean, that's kind of a good summation of the whole film to me. It feels like a more raw version of what he's going to become later. And it is fascinating. You can see the roots of it all. Like, you can see it, like his style is there. Like the slow-mo walking to music stuff is there. How he shoots, how he moves the camera through scenes. Like, it's all there. It's just really rough on the edges. And my biggest complaint with this movie is that the story has this like lack of propulsion in it, and I don't think it's a bad story. I just think it kind of meanders for a while. Like, I don't think we meet Teresa until like 50 minutes into this movie. And she's one of the main conflict points of the film. So the story just kind of moves around, and it goes at its own pace, and that's okay because it's like a character story. But like it just, to me, there were parts where I just wish it would just move, and I think cutting some of those scenes, like we were talking about, would help with that pace. And not even like you could tell, like I was saying, you can tell he's not like a pro editor. Some of the, not just the structural edits of the movie, but like the within the scene edits are a little rough. But I mean, but you can tell, like, I mean, like, 3 years later he made Taxi Driver, which is like just almost one of the greatest movies ever. So, I mean, he's there. The raw talent is there, and he learns very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, Scott. I think I didn't even realize until what I felt like was really late in the movie that a big part of Michael's conflict is that, you know, he wants to get in good with his uncle so he can like be a big mob guy. Like that to me should have been communicated fairly quickly so that you understand the context of why it's a problem for him to have to be dealing with Johnny. Yeah. I mean, maybe I missed something, but I feel like took me way too late in the movie to figure that out, and I almost did have to figure it out. Maybe this makes me seem dumb, but like I distinctly remember like putting it together and being like, oh, I get it. I get it. That's the conflict of this movie. And but you know, I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't think that a movie should hand everything to you, but I don't think we even got the pieces necessary to put that together until way past it would have actually been useful to know that.
I think that's generally fair. It did take me a little bit of time to get, and it's literally halfway through the movie when that conflict starts, really. Because, I mean, it feels like, and this is kind of true, that Scorsese's telling stories of his youth. So a lot of them, you know, don't really go anywhere. Like the whole pool hall scene is funny and it kind of character building, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It's just a fun story of this is what happened to these characters. Which, I mean, again, is not necessarily a bad thing on its own, but when looked at in the film as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely, I would agree that it has some pacing issues and there's a little bit of an episodic nature to it. Mm-hmm. And to Scott's point about how it takes a while to get going, my wife would agree with you. She didn't enjoy this movie a whole lot. I think it was about an hour and 30 minutes in. She was kind of like, all right, so what's this movie about?
It's probably about when Matt realized it too, though, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think so. Sounds about right.
I definitely agree that there's some pacing and structural issues that Scorsese would hammer out a lot better in Taxi Driver or Goodfellas. But I definitely think that it's such a... I kind of enjoy that episodic nature. It feels real to me, if that makes sense. It feels honest. It feels earnest. Things like that pool hall scene, just they feel like it's something that someone has lived through. It feels like something that these characters have done on a regular basis. It feels like this is a genuine slice of life in these people's life up until that ending piece in the bar where Johnny pulls the gun on Michael. Everything up until that point just feels like something that these people are going through and the struggles that they're going through until all of it comes to a head at the end of the movie.
Yeah. And that draws attention, I think, to their performances, which is something we've obliquely mentioned. But I mean, you've got some of the two leads are like really great actors, and they're like so young and haven't hardly been in anything yet at this point. But you can already tell, I think, that they're amazing, because so many of the scenes of this movie, so much of this movie is just scenes of Charlie and Johnny Boy interacting, hanging out, and even though I was conscious of the fact that a lot of these scenes were overly long, I also didn't really mind at all, because I'm like, yeah, but this is these two actors convincing me that this is really happening and that they're really these characters, That actually happened a lot, where I know I've been kind of negative on this movie, but like there were actually a lot of places where I kind of forgot I was watching a movie because of how just immersive the performances were.
Yeah, I think Robert De Niro is incredible in this movie. The first scene between the two of them, where he's like giving his long, drawn out excuses for why he has no money. I mean, that's amazing.
Love that.
That's amazing.
I love that speech.
It's really well written, and it's just like perfectly performed too. Like you even see like Johnny Boy gets lost in his own lie at some point and like can't even really figure his way out of it, and that's like performed so well. Like it's so good. Like, and he looks so young, and he's so good.
Yeah, you can see him mentally being like, oh, he's not buying this at all. I gotta change this.
I love how the two of the chemistry between Keitel and De Niro in this. Anytime they're on screen together, there's always some sort of Charlie tussling Johnny Boy's hair or slapping him across the face or some sort of embrace. There's always something there that kind of shows their friendship in ways that they're showing, not telling. It's really, really well done by Keitel and by De Niro. You can see their friendship on screen. You can see why Charlie Boy loves Johnny, or why Charlie loves Johnny Boy so much, and vice versa.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because they don't really say nice things to each other, like at all in this movie. No. So literally all of their affection toward each other has to be nonverbal. And it's subtle, but it's really well done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there are certain scenes that I think one might be tempted to view as not being plot important, but when you consider that the plot is actually like an internal character struggle, they really are. Like, so I'm thinking, for example, of when Johnny Boy is up on the roof shooting his gun randomly into New York City, which is terribly dangerous. And Charlie comes up and like gets him to stop, and then they like run away because the cops are coming. And you get this sense that like Charlie kind of needs this craziness in his life, but also knows that he can't afford to have this craziness in his life. And that to me was a great little vignette. Like, I love parts of movies where you could just kind of cut them out and they could be almost a standalone short story that absolutely tells everything you need to know right there. And I thought that was a perfect little sequence from beginning to end, an episode, if you will, because like you were saying, it is very episodic.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're laying low in the graveyard, foreshadowing. So good. I love how that whole sequence goes.
So the funny thing about the rooftop scene is that was part of the commentary that I listened to, and Scorsese said that comes from when he and his friends would hang out on the roofs a lot, and one of them had a gun and would shoot the water tower across the street and punch holes in it, and then the water would drain out of the water tower and then freeze, and there'd be these amazing icicles coming down the roof of the building across the street.
Oh, man.
Marty, what the fuck are you guys doing? That's incredibly dangerous. But that's, I mean, you could so much of this movie is very personal to him and his childhood. I mean, and it's very much like he was obviously never really involved in the mafia, but he was around it, and he was told by his father specifically, be polite to these guys, be nice to them, but don't get involved. Never let them do you a favor. So, I mean, a lot of his movies come from this perspective of kind of on the outside looking into this whole thing, and that's because he literally was. And that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a personal movie to him. Would it be fair to call it Martin Scorsese's Clerks?
Oh, jeez.
I kind of hate you right now.
Oh, man. My bad.
So you mean this
Scorsese to Kevin Smith?
This is the only watchable movie that he ever made?
Burn.
Can I just be the one to say that Paul is a mook?
Oh, man. What is a mook? All right.
Apparently it means like rat in Armenian or something. I looked it up because I was curious. Huh. So you're a rat.
Oh, it's so that whole. I love the dialogue in this movie. The script, I'll say, isn't like you said. There's pacing issues and there's an episodic nature to it. But the dialogue in this script, whether it's improvised or if it was actually written, some of it's just so funny and also so realistic, like that mook scene where they're all trying to figure out what he's even saying, what that word even means, or when they're getting shaken down by the police and Johnny Boy just looks at the cop and says, "Officer, can I get my hat? Can I call my wife?" with a total smart ass look on his face and tone. It's just so perfectly. There's so many great lines in this movie that it's kind of a shame that it doesn't get quoted as often as Taxi Driver or Goodfellas, because there's some really, really great lines in this movie.
I think you're right, but I think it's because they are really good lines, and I love the dialogue, but I think it's very muted. Like it's so casual and conversation-y that like specific lines don't jump out at you, even though like you're listening to the dialogue as a whole and you're saying like, man, this back and forth is just really great. I think it's just like, it's so natural in conversation like that, like no one in normal conversation is quotable. Like none of us are quotable right now, but but it still doesn't mean that it's not an interesting and well done conversation.
Yeah. And back to Johnny Boy's speech where he's trying to convince Charlie that he actually paid, and then that he was winning at a poker game, and a kid came in and yelled that the cops were coming, but then he came back with the money, and then he was down, and then Joey Scala, who's also Joey Clams, and they're the same person, and just it's so fun to watch De Niro weave this story and talk about how he's getting screwed over and how that he's going to pay, but you don't believe it for a second. And he's able to convincingly show that he's not honorable. He's not going to actually pay. but you can see how Charlie would sympathize with him and still try to make this work with him. It's a really great performance on multiple levels, both from a comedic standpoint as well as from an inner character struggle from both characters. It's one of the best scenes I think that Scorsese's ever directed from an actor standpoint. It's just so great to see these two actors who are two of the great actors of the 70s, or to come out of the 70s, to see them put together this kind of a performance, which is essentially entirely dialogue driven.
Yeah. And he's kind of childishly adorable too. Like even just the blowing up the mailbox thing. I mean, that's something a kid would do. And I think even his name even builds into that. I mean, just the fact that he's called Johnny Boy makes him seem more childish than every other character. So you kind of like, I mean, he's unhinged and unbalanced, but you kind of feel for him. And it's like, oh, that's just Johnny Boy.
Yeah, you get so used to seeing De Niro play similar types of characters as he gets older. I mean, obviously, most of the movies with De Niro that I've seen are older De Niro. And this is just kind of radical, a radical transformation by De Niro standards, because he really, embraces this youthful wildness in a way that you never see him do anywhere else.
Yeah, I'd say this is probably his most unique performance from his entire filmography. I mean, I don't think there's any other film where he plays a character like this.
I mean, you don't think Dirty Grandpa?
Very much. I mean, Dirty Grandpa is his magnum opus, but
he does do. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say he does do comedy now and then, and you can see bits of comedy De Niro in this role, but it's there's like the crazy energy of it is really what I find fun.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It's very much it's a wild performance. And if you look at all of his other performances from the 70s and 80s and 90s, which is really that's his time where he's the great actor. The Godfather 2, he's very reserved. Taxi Driver, he's crazy, but he's not wild. He doesn't have that manic energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Raging Bull, he's an awful person. He's this terrible monster of a person, but he doesn't have that power or that kinetic energy that there is in this role. This is just really a role where Scorsese lets him loose, lets him go, and he nails it. He nails every single scene that he's in, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's necessarily his best performance, but it's one of his better performances, and I think it's his most unique performance in all of his filmography.
Yeah, I think he's the best part of the movie, and I don't mean to undersell Harvey Keitel, because I think he's really fabulous here too. But there's just something about De Niro in this film that is magnetic. Like you can't every scene he was in, I couldn't look away.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
He's magnetic, but don't you get mad at him because he doesn't even intend to do anything right? It's not like he tries and he fails. He just doesn't even try.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah.
Like just when Charlie gives him the money, so he's got $30 to pay off Michael, and it's not really going to be enough. Like it's not close to enough, but it's just a show of good faith. And then he spends the money, like $20 of the money on booze. And it's just like, Jesus, Johnny Boy. And I think that ties into the destructive nature of him, that I think what frustrated Matt so much is that, just Charlie's continual, it just even associating with this person kind of makes him a bad person by proxy.
No, it definitely seems like it's an enabling relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie's vouching for Johnny Boy the whole movie, and Johnny Boy does nothing but shit all over it, and it's really, really tough to see why Charlie keeps enabling him in doing what he does, and in the end it ends poorly for all of them.
Yeah. What did you guys think? Like, I was like, this is probably one of the least violent Scorsese movies. You have the one guy dies midway through, and then you have the shooting scene at the end. But it's surprisingly reserved, and I think that ties into something you were talking about earlier, Kevin, where like everything seems like these are motions they go through every day until De Niro pulls out that gun at the end, and it's like. I think that the nonviolence works in that because like you contrast him pulling out a gun to the ridiculous pool hall fight they had, where one is harmless and innocent and just dumb people being dumb people, and then suddenly as soon as the gun is in it, like it shifts back to this is a mob movie type thing, where now like shit's going down, like someone just pulled a gun out, this is serious, someone's gonna die, and I think those two things contrast with each other very well.
Yeah, I think even when you look at the mob stuff, when that gets involved, when Charlie goes to shake down the restaurant owner, it's incredibly peaceful. Charlie goes in and says, "Hey, you need to pay," and the owner says he can't pay. He's not going to make the payment. He's not going to make the next payment, and that he should just give up the restaurant. And Charlie says, that's not going to happen. He'd rather get the loan payment. But there's never any violence. The mob goes to eat at the restaurant, and they just plan on installing Charlie as the new person to run it. It's a very peaceful. And that's a weird thing to say for a movie that does have some violence and is a Scorsese movie, but it's a very peaceful movie when it comes to that. Well,
it's very realistic too. Like, I mean, because if the mob was as violent as it is in the movies, no one would ever go to them because you're just gonna get your legs broken or shot or something. So it's very realistic to how the actual mob operated. Like, look, we provide you protection, we loan you money, you pay it back, or we take your stuff, and that's just what happens.
Yeah. And it's kind of refreshing to have a mob movie where the main character is just a loser, with respect to the mob, and his character arc isn't becoming a badass mob boss. His character arc is, if anything, he's burned all of his bridges and he's never going to be part of the mob now after kind of what he does.
Yeah.
So about that, originally the ending of the movie was continued. There was it goes on from where the movie ends. Johnny Boy survives, but Charlie talks to his uncle Giovanni, and basically Giovanni tells him, he's not welcome anymore. All of his ties are cut. He's not getting the restaurant. He's no longer a collector, and it's basically Charlie starting all over again, and that's the end of the movie. So, like you said, it's basically the end of the movie is Charlie's burned all his bridges. He's no longer in the mob. And I think that ending still works with what's in the film, because there's no way after a high profile thing like this where Johnny Boy has been shot, and clearly Charlie has been associating with Johnny Boy and Teresa, which was specifically prohibited, that he would be still on Giovanni's, on his good side.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was sufficiently clear, and that was a good point to end the movie, actually.
Yeah, I'm glad they cut that.
I'd agree.
Yeah. All right, do we have anything else we want to touch on?
Can I do a fan theory?
Absolutely.
So this isn't really a fan theory. I think it's just more of a diving a little bit deeper into something that I think Scorsese was doing. So we mentioned that there's that red lighting in the bar that is clearly a representation of a personal hell that Charlie's going through. Mm-hmm. I think there's definitely an element of people in that bar or things that happen in that bar are representative of the 7 deadly sins. So Charlie obviously would be lust. He clearly is lustful for the stripper in the bar, and he has to, go with penance. We kind of touched on that. There's the drunk in the bar who's so hammered he's sleeping on the table and can barely make it to the bathroom.
David Carradine.
Yes.
Oh my God, that was David Carradine. You're right.
And
Oh
then,
my God.
And then his brother was the one who shot him. Robert Carradine was the shooter.
Oh wow.
But the drunk is his gluttony. I'd say kind of all of them, Michael, Johnny Boy, and Charlie, all kind of fall into that greed where they want to have everything, but they can't get it. Michael keeps trying to up all of the money that Johnny Boy owes him. He goes from $1,800 to $3,000 because Johnny Boy, he keeps loaning Johnny Boy money because he wants to get paid back. Tony's a terrible bar owner. Which goes back to the idiot thing, but I think that also falls into sloth. He kind of cares about the bar. He cares about the cleanliness, and he cares about making sure that it looks up to snuff for the mob. But he can't be making any money off of that when everyone's throwing private parties and they're giving out free drinks. And Johnny Boy's got a big tab and a little tab that are now being evened out. Wrath is the shooter who kills the drunk. Johnny Boy is envy because he's always asking Charlie to give him a connection with his uncle. And then Michael is pride, which is what leads to the end of the movie. He's not mad at Johnny Boy about the money. He's mad about the fact that Johnny Boy called him, gave him an insult of $10, called him a jerk off and a disappointed Dunsky. I just feel like that was something that Scorsese was trying to say with that bar, was that it's the layers, that it's definitely hell, but also that all these elements to come together in what can be the 7 deadly sins, or all these different elements of sinful nature from a Catholic perspective. But that's just a crazy, wild guess on my part.
I mean, I'll take that. That's convincing enough for me.
I'm not sure that's intentional.
Yeah, one of the things in the commentary I was reading, Scorsese did say was, he's like, this movie doesn't mean anything. This is just, I just want to make this movie because it's about my childhood. And like, we've just spent almost an hour talking about all the different meanings in the film, and I think that's the great part about cinema, is that the author cannot mean any of this stuff and we can still find it in there. I think he was being a little facetious. I think he had put some meaning into this film, clearly, but that's a good theory. I think you can put an unintentional meaning into something that you didn't actively have in the front of your mind, but ended up in the film. I think that's pretty common. Yeah,
true.
For a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't think Spielberg intends to put a bunch of daddy issues or divorce issues into his movies, but they end up there a lot. So
that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely being facetious if you put several scenes of a man who's scared of hell torturing himself with fire. You're definitely being facetious if you say that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. All right. So, does anyone else have anything they wanted to specifically bring up? If not, Kevin, you can go into your final argument before we vote.
I do.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I mentioned that the opening was confusing. The opening, it gives the characters their little intros, and it does the Super 8 movie and stuff. Mm-hmm. What really threw me off was that, Charlie's thoughts. Charlie's a protagonist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. His thoughts are actually narrated by a different person, which
I think it's Scorsese,
so
right? Yeah,
it is. It's Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, and he was doing that for some kind of effect, but for me, the result was only pure confusion. I just wasn't on board with that.
Yeah, I do agree that it was a little confusing at times, because it took a second to realize that it's not someone talking to Charlie. It's supposed to be Charlie's voiceover. But I actually think the movie plays off that a little. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when all three of them are in the car at the end of the movie, and you think it switches to voiceover, with Charlie saying like talking to God again, and then he's actually just speaking out loud in the car, and the other two characters make fun of him for it, and they just said, "Are you talking to yourself?" And they laugh, and the scene just ends. It's like it seems like specifically trying to throw the audience off, thinking we're going back to voiceover when we're not.
Yeah, that part was amusing.
Yeah, it's something that he would do the reverse of kind of in Casino, where you would get Joe Pesci's doing a voiceover, and so you think everything's cool, and then all of a sudden he gets hit in the back with a baseball bat, and his voiceover cuts out immediately.
Yeah.
Ouch.
And that's basically, if you haven't seen Casino, I'm sorry to spoil it, but Joe Pesci dies from getting the shit beat out of him with a baseball bat. And that's basically, it's a trick that Scorsese likes to use, and he uses it really well. But I agree with Scott. He uses it really well in this situation where he's talking out loud, but you think it's a voiceover until you cut to the car and you see him talking to himself like a crazy person.
And then
it's actually one of.
It takes the beats for them to make fun of him for it. Like, that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, that's all I had.
Speaking of surprise deaths in Scorsese movies, unfortunately, so, they're driving around at the end of the movie, laughing and being crazy and high on life. And then the car pulls up next to them, and Johnny Boy gets graphically shot through the throat and blood sprays everywhere. And I burst out laughing, which is probably not but like, I just knew something like that was coming, and maybe it was even like a nervous release of tension laughter, but I was just like, oh, there it is, and I wonder, I doubt I would have had that reaction if I hadn't watched so many other Scorsese movies and had the Departed scene, in my mind on some level.
Yeah, that's. I wonder how much of your reaction to this movie is the fact that a lot of American crime stories after this film were modeled off of this film. Because this was a really popular movie. It was a huge hit. It kind of elevated him to prominence, so it was copied a lot. And I mean, it's not only that it's copied, it's in his typical style. So I wonder if this had been the first Scorsese movie that you had seen, if you would have approached it differently.
Probably would have. I think that's definitely fair.
It's a question we can never really truly answer, though.
I could hit myself in the head.
Can I also point out one more interesting thing about this movie?
Sure.
I don't know if any of you guys read about it, but originally this was going to be financed by Roger Corman, and it was going to be a blaxploitation movie.
Oh wow!
Directed by.
Did not read that.
Yeah, I had.
Yeah, it was supposed to be. It was going to cost like $300,000, and it was going to be a blaxploitation movie until Warner Brothers picked up the script and let Scorsese do it with Italian Americans.
I mean, how do you do that? Like, that fundamentally changes everything. I don't know how you even do that.
It's a great question.
I'm sure it would have been just black gangs instead of the mafia, but I could see most of the relationships being pretty similar.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that being the Italian Catholic part of it seems like so important to how the film works. I don't know, maybe not. I'm sure they could figure out a way, but that's crazy.
No, I agree. It doesn't seem. I can't, in my headcanon, I can't figure out how that movie works.
Yeah, now I kind of wish somebody would just try to make that movie anyway, inspired by the story.
All right, Kevin, are you ready for your final argument before we vote? If you have one,
I think so. If no one else has anything they want to add, I can go ahead and do my best closing argument.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I think we can all agree that Mean Streets isn't Martin Scorsese's best movie. I think we pretty much established that. But what I do think this movie does is that it takes all the elements of Scorsese's career. It takes all of the themes that he works on in Silence, in Taxi Driver, in Raging Bull, Goodfellas, The Departed. It takes all of that, the Catholicism, the redemption angle, the mafia, the importance of cinema. I mean, they go to the movies like 3 times in this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It takes all that and packages it into a film that, while is a little bit episodic, is a very shaggy movie. It's still a really good dog underneath all of it. It's still a really enjoyable film. It's still it's got a kinetic energy to it that, while it occasionally does have an episodic kind of draggy feeling in the pacing, you can't help but be enthralled by the characters, by the camera work, by the cinematic choices of the lighting and of the music. It's just it's Scorsese at his rawest, at his visceralist, just putting all of his tools together really for the first time and just kind of going for broke and, in my opinion, completely nailing it. In addition, I've brought some quotes and some other critics' views of the film. Pauline Kael said the film is a true original and a triumph of personal filmmaking. It made the list of Roger Ebert's great films, where he even says that it's one of the great early films in a filmmaker's career, and that you can see where all of Scorsese's tools eventually come from in films like Taxi Driver. It's the second highest rated film on Rotten Tomatoes for Martin Scorsese after Taxi Driver. It was nominated for the Library of Congress, the National Film Registry, and it was 93rd on the BBC's 100 Greatest Films list from a few years back. So I think it's just a great film. It's something that deserves lionization, and I think that if we were going to argue that Scorsese is one of the great filmmakers, this is a film that needs to be recognized by the Council of L as a Kryptonian Collection film.
All right. That was pretty convincing there.
Yeah.
Let's see how it turns out. We will do our vote now. Paul, we will start with you. What do you think about Main Streets? Yay or nay?
Well, I think citing all of those other critics is cheating, but still. Yes, I do vote yay.
Okay. Matt, we'll move on to you.
Okay. I'm highly tormented about this, guys. I have to admit.
Put your hand in the flame.
Yeah. Let me
contrarian.
Serve my penance. I mean, I am the contrarian. It's true. I think that I'm going to vote no on the basis that Red Belt is not in the Kryptonian Collection, and I think Red Belt is approximately as good a movie as this. This movie might be slightly better than Red Belt, but there has to be a line.
All right.
That's kind of what I was testing with this film. I'll be honest. I was seeing if what the was going to be for the Kryptonian Collection. So
and I appreciate that, because as I've said like 5 times on this show, it would be really boring if everyone just submitted like the best movies ever exclusively.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I'm actually
basically my
Go ahead.
My thinking was that I just saw Silence. I wanted to do a Scorsese film, but I didn't want to just sit here and bore you guys with talking about how great Taxi Driver is or how great Goodfellas was. I wanted to actually put something that, had some thematic elements that connected to Silence, but also had some issues and, something that could cause a more in-depth conversation than something that people have already talked about 100 times.
Yeah. So, Matt, this movie is way better than Red Belt. So, I don't know what you're talking about. That was a terrible movie. I was 50-50, throughout this whole thing. My biggest thing, and I know I've said this every time we do like a big director with a lot of movies, my biggest thing is this the movie of theirs I want in the collection? And I think I just have to learn to not think that way, because we've already said if we ever get to a point where someone nominates a movie by a similar director, we could do something cool and do like a battle thing and decide which one really is better. So I'm gonna vote yes here, just because like I love Martin Scorsese. This is not a perfect film by any means, but it is really important, and it is still generally very well done. And it was an enjoyable experience for me. And I do like what the film is saying, even if Scorsese says it's not saying anything. So that's it. It's in the collection. Once again, Matt is the only descendant. Sorry, Matt.
I enjoyed this movie, and I'm glad that I watched it. There have to be some standards.
See, the problem here is that you love Red Belt, and you're just still bitter about it.
That's true.
So can I propose something that obviously isn't just to poke the bear? So how many films do you think Spielberg should have in the collection?
I think I really only want one per director. And if we ever get two in, I think those two films need to go against each other, and a decision needs to be made as to which one gets to stay. That's my idea.
So you think, so if someone put up E.T. or Raiders of the Lost Ark up against Jaws, like that would be a challenge.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking like, I just feel like you can't have that. You can't have
agreed
one Spielberg in the Kryptonian Collection.
Look, we have to have, as Matt said, there has to be a line, and the line is Jaws better than E.T. or not?
Yeah,
and I don't know the answer.
Yeah, because these are the films that we're going to put in a space pod and send away from our world as it explodes. And there's only so much room in the pod, guys.
And there are a lot of directors out there. I mean, I could put all Spielberg's movies in there if that makes you happy, but I can't do that.
Well, you know what I would do is just try to limit how frequently one of them can be suggested. Maybe every 6 months or however many months.
Right, and I think, we haven't had this problem so far. This is a monthly show right now, so I don't see us having this problem for a very, very long time. But, I mean, it is an interesting thought, because, like, if I were to pick two directors where I definitely wanted multiple movies in, Spielberg and Scorsese would be them, and now we already have one from each. So, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I would agree with that. So can I propose a second question?
Sure.
When is Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace getting in?
Never.
Yeah.
That movie doesn't exist.
I mean, I'd love someone to. Yeah, as far as this podcast is concerned, that doesn't exist. But I would actually love someone to put forward a movie like that, because, I mean, it wouldn't get in, but it would be a fun discussion.
Well, that's what
I thought about it, actually. I thought about putting that so that you guys would have to watch it.
Well,
yeah, we would just be like, yeah, but seriously though.
But I mean, like, as much as I give shit to Red Belt, and it's Matt's brother who is the one that put that in, which makes it even better. But I am glad that movie was in. I'm glad that for the past, I think, 5 times, it's always been like a really tough decision for me, one way or the other. And I've recently gone towards yes, just because I haven't really, with the exception of Red Belt, sorry, Matt and Daniel, I haven't watched a movie that I just flat out didn't like. Like, there's various degrees of how much I liked it or not, but every one of these movies I've really liked. So it's always been a close, tough decision. And that's really, I think, what we wanted when we set out to do this thing. We wanted those tough, close decisions. Like, everyone has a list with Citizen Kane on it. That's boring. I didn't want that. So I'm liking it. I never thought Mean Streets would be in the collection, but here we are. And I'm happy.
Here we are.
Awesome. Well, Keven, thanks so much for bringing that movie. That was a lot of fun. And now you get to kick Paul out of his seat, and you get to come back next month if you would like. We don't make people do that, but if you would like,
I'd love to come back. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, that next month, or maybe it'll technically. We're recording this on the last day of January, so it still counts as January. So we're going to try to do another one in February. So everyone listening, look forward to that. And we haven't worked out who's going to be that yet. But then after that one is our 10th episode, which means, Matt, it's your time to pick a movie.
Yes.
So this is your time for revenge. The Revenge of Red Belt.
Yes.
Your time to shine, Matt.
I have 2 months to polish my arguments.
All right. So, Keven, do you want to give your Twitter or plug yourself or do any of that stuff?
Yeah. So again, like I said at the beginning, I write for LewtonBus.net. You can go there and you'll find, I haven't written there for a little while because I've been prepping for this show, but
it showed.
No, I had 5 pages of notes handwritten on this, so I came prepared. You can find me on Twitter at Keven Kuhlman 9. My handle is Butts Carlton Esquire. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at LewtonBus.net.
Awesome. Paul, what about you?
Okay, well, I write about games at Windows Central. I am gearing up to start my own site about games and movies, toys, and other things, basically anything of personal interest. And that is going to be called goodenoughgeek.com. So we hope to have that ready within a week or so.
Awesome.
And you can, I really look forward to having another outlet for expressing myself and also helping some of my friends who don't currently have an outlet be able to share their own writing. And yeah, we definitely hope you'll guest Scott and anybody else who wants to. And anyway, you can follow me on Twitter at Paul R. Acevedo.
Cool. Matt, how about you? Go.
I am on Twitter at MoreDinnerMail and write articles for DailyPlanetFilms.com.
Hey, I know that place.
Yeah.
I am also on Twitter at ScottDaly85. That's DALY. I also write for DailyPlanetFilms.com, and I just pledged publicly to spend the rest of my 2017 watching all 100 of the BBC's list of best films of the 21st century and writing about them. So that's what I'm going to go do as soon as I get off this call, is go start writing about a movie. So it's quite a challenge, and I waited until the end of the first month for some reason to do this instead of starting at the beginning of the year like a normal person. But I just like to be a little different. So you can look for that at dailyplanetfilms.com. And you can subscribe to this. Matt, we just moved our host to Libsyn, so we're technically on a new host now, but you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, YouTube. If you have an Amazon phone, I think it should work on anything. It should work on any of your podcast apps.
Yes, and let us know if it doesn't.
Yeah, send us an email at dailyplanetfilms@gmail.com if for some reason you were subscribed and are no longer getting the feed. We should have fixed all those problems. But I guess if you're doing that, you can't really listen to this, so that's kind of a problem. But yeah, that should all be working. So if you can go into those apps, especially iTunes, and take some time to subscribe, rate us, review us. All those help with visibility on that site, so that'd be great. But that's all we have for this week. Keven, Paul, thanks again. This was a lot of fun. And welcome to the Kryptonian Collection, Mean Streets, and Martin Scorsese.
The podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next Friday.